to the house I sold while my son was at work. I always believed family was forever, until the day my son Marcus raised his hand against me, not once or twice, but 15 times, each blow accompanied by the laughter of his wife, Shanice. What they didn't imagine was that the house where I was humiliated still bore my name, and that my revenge would be served not with screams, but with the ice-cold silence of legal documents. I can still feel the burning from that night as if it were yesterday. It was just another Sunday when families gather for dinner. I had prepared the fried chicken Marcus adored since childhood, the one with my mother's secret recipe he always requested on his birthday. As if time hadn't passed, I still saw him as my boy, despite his 38 years and the increasingly hardened expression he'd acquired lately. Shanice arrived first with her strong perfume that always gave me a headache. She smiled that smile that never reached her eyes and placed a cheap bottle of wine on the table. "For the beloved mother-in-law," she said, knowing perfectly well I didn't drink because of my blood pressure medication. I thanked her anyway, as I always did, to keep the peace. Marcus arrived half an hour later, already agitated. I noticed by the way he threw his keys on the table and how roughly he greeted me. Something must have gone wrong at work, I thought. I didn't ask. I already knew his fits of rage when contradicted. We sat at the table and I served the food in silence. It was then that I commented, without thinking much about it, that the kitchen faucet was dripping and needed repair. "The faucet of my house, you mean?" he responded, emphasizing the word, as if he needed to remind me that I lived there only by his goodness. But the truth was different. The house had been purchased with money from the sale of the apartment where I'd lived for 30 years after my husband died. At that time, Marcus said it would be better to put everything in his name for tax purposes. Because I trusted him, I signed the transfer, but I kept the original deed in my name. "It's just a faucet, son," I answered quietly. That's when he slammed the table, making the silverware jump. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you can tell me what to do in my own house?" Shanice smiled discreetly behind her napkin, her eyes shining with that morbid satisfaction she always displayed when there was tension between Marcus and me. "You forget that I took you in when no one else wanted you," he continued, standing up. "You forget you could be in a nursing home right now." I remained silent with my eyes fixed on my still full plate. The chicken I had prepared with so much care now seemed like a tasteless mass, as heavy as the air around us. "Look at me when I talk to you," he shouted, grabbing my chin forcefully to lift my face. That's when it happened. The first blow came as a shock, not so much from the pain, but from the surprise. Never in his entire life had my son raised his hand against me. I felt my cheek burn as tears accumulated in my eyes. Shanice gasped theatrically, covering her mouth with her hand, but her eyes were smiling. She was enjoying the spectacle. "Marcus, please," I whispered. The second blow was stronger. Then came the third and fourth. I lost count after the 10th. My ears were ringing and my entire face was burning. I didn't scream, didn't beg. I remained seated straight as a rod, while my own son unloaded his rage on me. When he finally stopped, he was breathing heavily. I looked at him without recognizing the man before me. Where was the boy who held my hand to cross the street? Where was the teenager who brought me flowers from the neighbor's garden on Mother's Day? "That's so you learn to respect who's in charge here," he said, straightening his shirt as if he'd just closed an important business deal. Shanice was openly smiling now, not even bothering to hide it. I stood in silence, leaving the plate untouched, and walked slowly to my room at the back of the house. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally let the tears fall. But these weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of a decision crystallizing in my heart like ice on a winter night. As I touched my swollen face, I remembered the dresser drawer where I kept the original house deed, the document proving that legally this place was still mine. Marcus had convinced me to transfer the property to his name, but we never completed the legal process. He only had a private contract with no real legal value. That night, while listening to their laughter in the living room as if nothing had happened, I took the deed from the drawer and put it in a folder. In the morning, when they left for work, I would visit my old friend Jerome, a retired lawyer who still maintained contacts in the legal field. I went to bed fully clothed and couldn't sleep well. The hours dragged as I planned every step of what I would do. It wouldn't be loud or violent revenge. It would be silent and definitive, like the ice that now occupied the place where maternal love once existed. When the sun rose, I heard Marcus's footsteps in the hallway, then the sound of the shower, and finally the front door slamming shut. Shanice left shortly after, the sound of her heels echoing through the empty house. I waited another half hour to make sure they wouldn't return for something forgotten. I put the folder with the documents in my purse, put on my warmest coat, the one Marcus called an old rag, and left through the back door. The day was cloudy and cold, as if time itself conspired with my mood. I walked 3 blocks to Jerome's house in the neighborhood. He opened the door, still in his pajamas, but his expression changed when he saw my swollen face. "Olivia, my God, what happened to you?" "I need your help, Jerome," I said simply, entering when he stepped aside. "I need to sell a house." Jerome served me coffee while examining the documents I'd brought. His eyes went from the paper to my swollen face, connecting the dots without me needing to explain everything in detail. He was an intelligent man and had known my late husband. "The deed is in your name," he confirmed, adjusting his glasses. "Marcus never registered the transfer with a notary. Legally, the house is still yours, Olivia." I felt a cold relief run through my body. "Then I can sell it?" "Yes, you can," he answered, putting the cup on the table. "But are you sure about this? He's your son after all." I touched my swollen cheek lightly. A son who did this in my own house in front of his wife who laughed at me. "I'm sure, Jerome." He nodded gravely. "I know a couple who's looking for a house in that area. They can pay cash and close the deal quickly if that's what you want." "That's exactly what I want," I replied. "I want everything done while they're at work. I want Marcus to come home today and find strangers living there." Jerome hesitated. "Olivia, this is fair," I completed. "It's fair, Jerome. I'm not asking for anything more than what belongs to me by right." He didn't argue further. Instead, he picked up the phone and began making calls, first to the interested couple, then to a notary friend, then to a moving company. As I watched him organizing everything, I felt lighter for the first time in years. Before noon, I was signing the sales papers at a notary's office downtown. The buying couple, the Johnsons, seemed kind and excited about the sudden purchase. They didn't ask about the strange circumstances, perhaps because the discount on the price was too attractive to raise questions. "Can you move in today?" I said while handing them the keys. "The house is furnished, but you can do whatever you want with the furniture. I don't want anything from that place." Mrs. Johnson took my hands in hers. "Thank you for selling us your house. We've always dreamed of living in that neighborhood." I didn't have the courage to tell her that that place was no longer a dream for me, but a nightmare. I simply smiled and wished them happiness. Jerome accompanied me to the bank to deposit the sale money. "What will you do now, Olivia? Where will you live?" "I have a friend in Charlotte who always offered me a room. I'll stay with her for a while until I decide what to do with the money. Maybe I'll buy a small apartment for myself. In reality, I already knew exactly what I would do. Part of the money would be donated to an institution that shelters women victims of domestic violence. The rest would buy a small house on the outskirts of Asheville, where I could have the peace I so deserved after decades of caring for others. As we walked, Jerome suddenly stopped. "Olivia, aren't you going to take your personal things, clothes, documents, photos?" I shook my head. "I already took the essentials last night. The rest is just stuff. I can buy other things." The truth is, I didn't want anything that would remind me of that life, not even photos of Marcus as a child. That smiling boy in the photographs had died long ago, replaced by the man who raised his hand against his own mother. By noon, the moving trucks were already at the house loading the Johnsons' furniture. Jerome had explained the situation to them, asking for discretion. They agreed to finish moving before 6 p.m., the time Marcus normally returned from work. I didn't go to watch. I didn't want to see that house ever again. Instead, I took a taxi to the bus station and bought a ticket to Charlotte. While waiting for the bus, I sent a message to my friend Elena, telling her I was on my way. "Did something happen, Olivia?" she responded almost immediately. "I'll tell you when I arrive," I typed. But yes, many things happened. While sitting on the waiting bench, I imagined Marcus coming home, inserting his key in the lock, only to discover it no longer worked. I visualized his face when he found strangers in his living room, the panic in his eyes as he realized he no longer had a place to call his own. Should I feel guilty? Perhaps. But whenever that guilt threatened to surface, I touched my still aching face and remembered Shanice's laughter. No, there was no room for guilt, only for the cold justice I had served. The bus arrived and I boarded with only a small suitcase, containing a few changes of clothes and the now canceled deed to the house. When the engine started and we began to move away from the city, I felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. My phone began ringing incessantly 2 hours later. Marcus, Shanice, Marcus again. I could imagine the chaos they were living through. I turned off the phone and looked out the window, watching the landscape gradually change from urban to rural. Elena was waiting for me at the Charlotte terminal with a tight hug. When she saw my face, she gasped, "My God, Olivia, who did this to you?" "My son," I replied simply, finally allowing myself to cry in the arms of my friend of decades. "But it's over now." She took me to her house on the outskirts of the city, a cozy place with a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains that seemed to embrace the horizon. We sat on her balcony with cups of hot tea while I told her everything that had happened. "You sold the house while they were at work?" Elena asked incredulously. I nodded. The house was mine. It always was. Marcus just believed it was his. Elena shook her head, impressed. "And now, what will you do?" I looked at the distant mountains, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in years. "I'm going to start over, Elena. At 60 years old, I'm going to start over." That night, I turned on my phone briefly to check the time and found dozens of missed messages and calls. Most were from Marcus, alternating between desperate pleas and furious threats. Some were from Shanice, accusing me of ruining their lives. There were also messages from unknown numbers, probably lawyers they'd hired in a rush. One message in particular caught my attention. It was from Jerome. "It's done, Olivia. The Johnsons are already settled and changed the locks. Marcus showed up yelling, but they called the police. It's all legally protected. Rest in peace." It wasn't a rest in peace of death, but of life, a new life that I would build from the ashes of the old one. I turned off the phone again and looked at the stars scattered across the North Carolina sky. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe completely. The mountain air filled my lungs like a promise of freedom. The first days at Elena's house were strange. I would wake startled in the middle of the night, confused about where I was, my heart racing as I remembered the events. Sometimes I would touch my face instinctively, as if I could still feel the mark of Marcus's blows. The swelling had diminished, but the memory remained as vivid as an open wound. Elena noticed my unease. One morning, while we had coffee on the balcony, she took my hand. "You did what you had to do, Olivia. Don't carry guilt for that." "It's not guilt," I replied, watching a hummingbird visit the garden flowers. "It's strangeness. For 38 years I was Marcus's mother. I built my life around that, and now you're just Olivia," Elena completed with a gentle smile. "Olivia who can do what she wants, without accounting to anyone." There was a terrifying freedom in those words. Who was Olivia without the role of sacrificial mother? Who was I apart from the woman who had dedicated her life to an ungrateful son? In the second week, I decided to turn on my phone to check my bank account. The money from the house sale was already available, a considerable amount that would give me comfort for the coming years. There were more messages from Marcus, but the tone had changed. Now he was begging. He said it had been a mistake, that he was sorry, that Shanice had left him. The latest messages were almost incoherent, mixing rage and desperation. One of them made me pause. "I'm sleeping in the car, Mom. I have nowhere to go. Please forgive me." I felt a pang in my chest, that maternal instinct that never completely disappears. For a moment, my fingers hovered over the keyboard about to respond. But then I remembered Shanice's laughter, the sound of her hand against my face, the humiliation I felt sitting at that table while they had fun with my pain. I turned off the phone without responding. The next day, we visited a local real estate office. There was a small property for sale on the outskirts of Asheville. Nothing very large, just half an acre with a modest house, some fruit trees, and a stream crossing the back of the property. It was perfect. "Are you sure?" Elena asked when I expressed immediate interest. "Don't you want to think about it a bit more?" "I've been thinking about this for years." "Without knowing it," I replied with a certainty that surprised me. I always wanted a place like this, just mine, where I could plant my own vegetables and wake up to the sound of birds. We made an offer the same day. The owner, an older gentleman moving to live with his daughter in Raleigh, accepted promptly. In a week, I would be the owner of my own piece of land in the mountains of North Carolina. While waiting for the paperwork to be finalized, I began buying the basics for my new life: simple clothes, some kitchen utensils, seeds to plant. Elena accompanied me on shopping trips, her enthusiasm almost as great as mine. "You're different," she commented while we chose gardening tools. "More alive." It was true. The hunched and silent woman who had lived in Marcus's house, always trying to take up the minimum space possible, was disappearing. In her place was emerging someone who had forgotten how to exist. The Olivia who made plans, who smiled without fear, who chose for herself. 2 days before moving to the house, an unfamiliar car stopped in front of Elena's house. My heart froze when I saw Marcus step out of the vehicle. He was disheveled, with stubble and deep dark circles. He seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks. "How did he find us?" I whispered to Elena, who was beside me at the window. "He must have called all your friends until he found out," she answered, squeezing my arm in solidarity. "Do you want me to throw him out?" I took a deep breath, feeling initial fear give way to a cold calm. "No, I'm going to talk to him." I went out to the balcony while Marcus approached slowly like a wounded animal. When he saw me, he stopped uncertainly. His eyes scanned my face where the last remnants of the bruises were still visible. "Mom," he began, his voice thick. I raised my hand, interrupting him. "Don't call me that. You lost that right that night." He swallowed, his eyes filling with tears. "Please let me explain. I was drunk. I had problems at work. Shanice was pressuring me." 15 times, I said simply. "You hit me 15 times while your wife laughed. There's no explanation for that, Marcus." He fell to his knees on the stone path, sobbing. "Now I've lost everything, Mom. Shanice left me. I'm sleeping in the car. My friends won't answer my calls. No one wants to help me." I watched him there, crumbling. The son I had raised, whom I had held in my arms when he had a fever, for whom I had sewn superhero costumes, whom I had taught to ride a bicycle, now reduced to a broken man, begging not for forgiveness, but for convenience. "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked, my voice softer now, but no less firm. "I want to come back," he sobbed. "I want my life back. Please, tell the new owners it was a mistake that you couldn't sell the house." And there it was. Not true remorse, but just desperation to regain the lost comfort. Not once did he mention my pain, my humiliation. It all boiled down to what he had lost. "I can't do that," I replied calmly. "And even if I could, I wouldn't. The house is gone, Marcus. Your old life is gone." He lifted his face, contorted with crying. "What am I going to do? Where will I live? You're 38 years old, you have a job and your health. You're going to do what many do. Start over, rent a small place, save, rebuild." "Alone?" he asked, his voice almost childlike. "Yes, alone, just like I'm doing at 60. Marcus stood slowly, wiping his face with his shirt sleeve. Something changed in his expression, the plea giving way to contained rage. "You have no heart. A real mother would never do this to her own son. That might have hurt me weeks ago, but now it only confirmed that I had made the right decision. A real son would never do what you did. Goodbye, Marcus." I turned to go inside, but his words stopped me. "This isn't over. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to prove you were mentally ill when you signed those papers. I'm going to get back what's mine." I looked at him over my shoulder, feeling only deep sadness. "The house was never yours, Marcus. That was your mistake from the beginning." I went inside and closed the door, hearing his screams transform into threats that became increasingly desperate. Elena hugged me in silence as we listened to the car leave with a harsh acceleration, tires squealing on the asphalt. "Are you okay?" she asked after a while. Surprisingly, I was. The encounter I'd dreaded so much had happened, and instead of breaking me, it confirmed my strength. Marcus wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was just desperate about what he'd lost. "I'm better than I imagined I'd be," I replied honestly. That night, I received a call from Jerome. "Olivia, Marcus contacted me. He's threatening to file a lawsuit." "It doesn't have a case, does it?" I asked, feeling a slight tremor of concern. "Absolutely none," Jerome guaranteed. "The house was legally in your name. You were in full possession of your mental faculties when you sold it, and we have witnesses to the aggression if needed. He's just bluffing out of desperation. Thank you, Jerome, for everything. Just be careful, Olivia. Desperate people can do unthinkable things." After the call, I sat thinking about Jerome's words. Marcus was hurt and humiliated, a dangerous combination for someone who had already demonstrated capacity for violence. But I would not live in fear, not anymore. The move to the house happened on a sunny morning. The place was even more beautiful than I remembered. The small but welcoming house, the land sloping gently down to the stream, the fruit trees covered with blossoms promising abundance in the coming months. Elena insisted on spending the first few days with me, helping arrange the few pieces of furniture I had bought and planting the first seeds in the garden we improvised. At night, we sat on the balcony in newly purchased rocking chairs, drinking chamomile tea and watching the fireflies dancing between the trees. "It's strange," I commented on the third night. "I spent so much of my life taking care of others that now I almost feel guilty about taking care of just myself." Elena smiled. "You deserve it, Olivia. You always deserved it." The day Elena returned to her house, I felt a knot in my chest. Was I really prepared to live alone, far from everything and everyone? The house was 20 minutes by car from the nearest town, and I still didn't have my own vehicle. "I'm just a call away," Elena guaranteed as she said goodbye. "And I'll visit whenever I can. Besides, you'll meet the neighbors soon. They're good people here in the mountains." When her car disappeared on the dirt road, I sat on the balcony and looked at my small kingdom. The loneliness I feared didn't arrive. Instead, I felt a deep peace, as if I had finally found my place in the world. In the following weeks, I established a simple routine. I would wake with the sunrise, prepare strong coffee, and go tend the garden before the day's heat intensified. The first seedlings were already beginning to appear. Lettuces, carrots, tomatoes, aromatic herbs. Seeing these small lives growing under my care brought me a satisfaction I had never experienced. Afterward, I would spend some hours exploring the land, discovering its secrets. I found an old apple tree hidden among other trees, a small bench made of stones near the stream that the previous owner must have built, and even a hummingbird nest in a flowering shrub near the kitchen window. In the afternoons, I read the books I always wanted to read but never had time for. Novels, biographies, books about gardening and cooking, or I simply sat on the balcony with my notebook, writing down thoughts, memories, plans for the future. It was like rediscovering a version of myself that had been silenced for decades. The nearest neighbors, the Mitchells, introduced themselves after a week, a retired couple who kept bees on a larger farm half a mile away. They brought homemade bread and blueberry jam as a housewarming gift. "If you need anything, just holler," Mr. Mitchell said with a kind smile. Here in the mountains, we look after each other. His wife invited me to a Sunday lunch where I met other neighbors from the region. Simple, genuine people who welcomed me without asking questions about my past. It was refreshing to be just Miss Olivia from the Creek House instead of Marcus's mother or the woman abused by her son. One afternoon, while gathering some herbs for dinner, I heard the sound of a car approaching. My heart immediately raced. Could it be Marcus? Had he found my address? I dropped the herb basket and ran inside the house, nervously peeking out the window. It was just the mailman, delivering a package that Elena had sent. Flower seeds we couldn't find in the region. I breathed a sigh of relief, but I realized that the fear was still there, hidden beneath the surface of my new life. That night, sitting on the balcony with a cup of tea, I reflected on that fear. I had rebuilt my life, found peace, and even a new community that welcomed me. But I was still frightened by the sound of an unknown car. Marcus still had that power over me. I decided I wouldn't allow that. The next morning I called Jerome. "I need to know how he is," I said without beating around the bush. Not out of maternal concern, but for my own peace of mind. Jerome was silent for a moment. "He gave up the lawsuit, Olivia. He consulted with some lawyers, and they all said the same thing. It had no case. As far as I know, he rented a small apartment in Atlanta, and is trying to reorganize himself. And Shanice went back to her parents in Memphis. From what I heard, it seems the marriage was already hanging by a thread before this incident. The loss of the house was just the final push. I absorbed that information in silence. Marcus was moving on, rebuilding his life just as I had told him he would. For some reason, this brought me relief, not because I was concerned about his well-being, but because it meant he had fewer reasons to try to find me. Thank you, Jerome. That's what I needed to know. Olivia, he said before I hung up, are you happy there? The question took me by surprise. Happy. It was a word I hadn't used for so long that I'd almost forgotten its meaning. I'm at peace, I replied finally, and I think for me, that is happiness. As the months passed, my small house flourished. The garden was already producing enough vegetables not only for my consumption, but also to trade with the neighbors for other items. Fresh eggs, homemade bread, honey. The fruit trees began to give their first fruits, and I learned to make jams and preserves with Mrs. Mitchell. I bought some chickens for fresh eggs and a dog, a caramel-colored mixed breed, that appeared on the path one day and decided that my yard would be his new home. I called him Biscuit, because he jumped with joy when he saw me arrive with his food. One afternoon, I received an unexpected visit. It was Elena, accompanied by an older woman I didn't immediately recognize. Olivia, this is Dorothy, Elena introduced. She directs the shelter for women victims of violence in Asheville. Only then did I remember. I had donated a considerable part of the money from the house sale to that institution without revealing my identity. Dorothy took my hands in hers. I came personally to thank you. Your donation allowed us to repair the roof that was falling and buy new beds for the children. A lump formed in my throat. You don't need to thank me. I just hope it helps other women find the strength it took me so long to find. You are an example for all of us, Dorothy said, her eyes tearful. Elena told me your story. What you did requires a courage that few possess. I didn't consider myself courageous. I had just done what was necessary to survive. But seeing the gratitude in that woman's eyes, I realized my story could mean something to others beyond myself. On that same day, after the visitors left, I sat at the kitchen table and began to write. Not just a simple diary entry, but the beginning of a book. My story told not with rage or bitterness, but as a testimony that it's never too late to start over, to demand respect, to find peace. I wrote every night for weeks, the words flowing like the stream that crossed my property. Sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, but always moving forward. I wrote about the hits, about the humiliation, about selling the house, about my rebirth in the mountains. I wrote without reservation, putting into words pain I had never shared with anyone. When I finished the manuscript, I sent it to Elena, who showed it to a friend who worked at a small publishing house. To my surprise, they were interested. Your story can help other women find their own strength, the editor said over the phone. Especially older women who believe they're trapped in abusive situations. The launch of the book, Starting Over at 60, happened at a small bookstore in Asheville 6 months later. I was nervous, unsure if I had done the right thing by exposing my life so openly. What if Marcus read it? What if he tried to stop me? But when I saw the room full of women, some young, some middle-aged, many older like me, I realized that my story no longer belonged only to me. It was a beacon for others who were still lost in the darkness I knew so well. How did you find the courage? A woman asked during the autograph session, her trembling hands holding my book. I thought for a moment before responding. It wasn't courage I found first. It was dignity. Courage came later when I realized I deserved more. than what I was receiving. She nodded with tears in her eyes and whispered a thank you that carried the weight of decades of silence. At the end of the event, when the bookstore was almost empty, I noticed a man standing near the door. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized Marcus, thinner, older, watching me from a distance with an expression I couldn't decipher. Our eyes met across the nearly empty bookstore. Marcus didn't approach, just stood there like a statue near the door. I felt my body stiffen, preparing instinctively for a confrontation. Elena, who was beside me organizing the unsold books, sensed my tension. "It's him," she whispered, following my gaze. I nodded slightly, unable to tear my eyes away from the man I once called son. He looked different, not just thinner, but somehow diminished, as if he'd shrunk inside his own clothes. The air of arrogance that always accompanied him had vanished. "Do you want me to ask him to leave?" Elena offered, her tone protective. "No," I replied, surprising myself with my own calmness. "It's fine." I stood up and walked slowly in his direction, feeling strangely powerful in my new dress, a gift I had bought for myself with the first book advance. Marcus remained motionless, his eyes registering each of my steps as if he were seeing a ghost. I stopped a few meters from him, maintaining a safe distance, not from fear, I realized, but by choice, out of respect for my own boundaries. "Hello, Marcus," I said simply. He swallowed, his eyes traveling across my face, my posture, as if trying to reconcile the confident woman before him with the submissive mother he knew. "You're different," he commented finally, his voice low and uncertain. "I am," I confirmed. There was no need to explain further. He was holding a copy of my book. I noticed the edges were already slightly bent, as if it had been read several times. "I came to give you this," he said, extending a white envelope. "It's not much, but it's what I can pay now." I looked at the envelope without taking it. "What is this?" "Money," he replied, still extending the envelope. "I started saving after I read your book, a little each month to reimburse you for the house." Surprise left me momentarily speechless. Of all the things I imagined Marcus might want, that was never in my head. "I don't need your money," I replied finally. "I know," he said, lowering his hand with the envelope, "but I need to pay you, please." There was something in his voice, not manipulation or self-pity, but a genuine need. I realized it wasn't about the money itself. It was about recognition, about taking responsibility. "What do you really want, Marcus?" I asked directly. He looked at the ground for a moment, then back at me, his eyes surprisingly clear. "I want to say that I read your book 3 times. I want to say that you were right to do what you did. I want to say that I'm sorry, not for losing the house, but for what I did to you, for the hits, for the humiliation." He paused, breathing deeply. "And I want to say that I understand if you never forgive me." I hadn't prepared for this. I had imagined Marcus being furious, threatening, perhaps even vengeful or pathetically begging for financial help, but not this. This sober, reflective version that seemed to have truly understood the weight of his actions. "Where are you living now?" I asked, changing the subject while processing his words. "I rented a small apartment near work and," he replied, "nothing special, but it's what I can afford in Atlanta." "And Shanice?" A sad smile appeared on his face. "She left when she realized there was no more big house or comfortable bank account. It was probably the best thing that could have happened." We stood in silence for a moment. Elena kept her distance, but I could feel her watchful gaze, ready to intervene if necessary. "Your book," Marcus continued, lifting the copy slightly. "It's powerful. It hurt to read, It hurt a lot, but I needed it. I had never seen things from your perspective before. Most abusers don't, I replied, surprised by the cold, analytical tone in my voice. It wasn't cruelty, just a statement of fact. I know I don't deserve anything from you, he said, his voice faltering. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be a better person. I'm attending a group for men with a history of violence. I'm learning. I looked at him. I really looked at him. Beyond the familiar figure of my son, beyond the good and bad memories, I saw only a middle-aged man trying to rebuild himself from the rubble of his own mistakes, not much different from what I myself had done. I'm glad you're seeking help, I said sincerely. It's the first step. He nodded, still holding the envelope. I still want you to accept this, not for you, but for me. I need to start repairing what I did somehow. I thought for a moment and had an idea. There's a shelter for women victims of violence in Asheville. It's called Safe Haven. Make your donation there. His eyes opened slightly in understanding. That's the place where you donated part of the house money, isn't it? It's in the book. I nodded. They need it more than I do. He put the envelope in his pocket, accepting my suggestion. I'm going to do that tomorrow morning. Another silence, less tense this time. Your house in the mountains seems like a beautiful place, he commented, referring to the descriptions in the book. You seem happy there. I am, I confirmed. I found my place. I would like to, he began hesitantly. No, forget it. What? Nothing. I don't have the right to ask for anything. I understood what he wanted to say, even without him completing the sentence. He wanted to visit me, see where I lived, perhaps try to rebuild some kind of relationship. But he was right. It was too soon. Maybe it always would be. I need to go, he said finally, sensing my silence. I just wanted to see you and tell you this in person. Your book is going to help a lot of people. You're stronger than I ever imagined. It was the most sincere thing Marcus had ever said to me in my entire adult life. Not a manipulation or a compliment to get something in return. Just a simple truth offered without expectations. Thank you for coming, I replied, surprising us both, and good luck with your recovery. He nodded his head, an almost imperceptible movement, and then turned to leave. At the door he stopped and looked back one last time. Mom, Olivia, I'm really sorry. And then he was gone, leaving only the soft tinkling of the bookstore door behind him. Elena immediately came close. Are you okay? What did he want? I took a deep breath, feeling a strange mixture of emotions I couldn't name. It wasn't forgiveness. It was too soon for that. It wasn't reconciliation. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. It was something more subtle, more complex. He wanted to acknowledge what he did, I replied finally, and I think he also needed to see that I'm okay. And are you? Elena asked, looking for signs of disturbance in my face. I thought about my current life, the peaceful house with the murmuring stream, the chickens happily scratching in the yard, Biscuit greeting me every morning with limitless enthusiasm, shared meals with neighbors, quiet nights writing by lamplight. I'm better than I ever was, I replied honestly. That night, back at the house, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea and watched the stars. Biscuit slept at my feet, snoring softly. The encounter with Marcus had stirred feelings I thought I'd buried, but not in the way I feared. I realized I didn't hate my son. I also didn't love him as before. That love had been burned along with my dignity on that fateful night. What I felt was something closer to distant compassion, the kind of feeling you have for a stranger trying to fix their life after a major mistake. I took my notebook, and began to write, not for a new book, but for myself. I wrote about the encounter, about the words exchanged, about the diminished man Marcus had become. I wrote about the strange sense of closure that conversation had brought. When I finished, I closed the notebook and breathed in the pure night air. The scent of honeysuckle blooming near the balcony filled my lungs. I was at peace, not because of Marcus's remorse, but despite it. My happiness no longer depended on his approval, his love, or his recognition. It was entirely mine. Spring came to the mountains with an explosion of colors and aromas. The cherry tree near the house filled with pink blossoms, the apple trees filled with fragrant white flowers, and the garden thrived with abundant vegetables. I woke every day to the sound of birds singing and fell asleep to the croaking of frogs at the stream's edge. My book had gained unexpected repercussion. I began receiving letters from readers, mainly older women who, like me, had endured abuse for years, convinced it was too late to change. Some said my story had given them courage to leave toxic relationships. Others that they had confronted adult children who mistreated them. Each letter filled me with an emotion I had never experienced before, a sense of purpose, greater than my own journey. Visits to the shelter became regular. Once a month I went to Asheville to talk with women seeking shelter there. I didn't consider myself a counselor or therapist, just someone who could say, "I understand," and really mean it. Over time, Dorothy suggested I formalize those visits as a support group. "Women open up with you in a different way," she explained. "You represent a real possibility of starting over, especially for older women." That's how Starting Together was born, a group that met every 2 weeks at the shelter. There, women of all ages shared their stories, their fears, their small victories. I simply moderated, offering my own experience when it seemed useful. The second anniversary of my move to the mountains arrived with the scent of apple blossoms in the air. I decided to celebrate with a Sunday lunch, inviting the people who had become important in my new life. Elena, the Mitchells, Dorothy, and some women from the support group who had already moved forward. The morning dawned perfectly. Blue sky, pleasant temperature, a gentle breeze swaying the leaves of the trees. I woke up early to prepare the house and cook. I had planned a simple but welcoming menu: roasted chicken, mac and cheese, salad made from fresh leaves from my garden, and for dessert, a peach pie that my mother used to make. While cooking, Biscuit dozed lazily near the stove, occasionally opening an eye to check if any food scraps would accidentally fall for him. The house was impeccable, not luxurious, but cozy and genuinely mine. On the walls, I had framed some watercolors I began painting in recent months, encouraged by Elena. They weren't masterpieces, but they captured the simple beauty of my small paradise. The stream, the trees, the sunrise seen from the balcony. Guests began arriving around noon. Elena came first, bringing a lemon pie as her contribution. The Mitchells arrived soon after with a jar of their special honey. Dorothy arrived with 2 women from the shelter I hadn't met yet, introducing them warmly. We arranged a large table on the balcony, covering it with a colorful embroidered tablecloth I'd bought at the craft market. Conversations flowed naturally. Laughter echoed across the property. Stories were shared without hurrying. I observed that diverse group gathered at my house, people I didn't even know 2 years ago, but who were now an integral part of my life. After lunch, as we served coffee, I heard the sound of a car approaching on the dirt road. I wasn't expecting anyone else. All the guests exchanged curious glances. "Are you expecting anyone else, Olivia?" Elena asked. "No," I replied, standing to see who it was. My heart raced when I recognized the car pulling to a stop under the shade of an apple tree. It was Marcus, alone. A tense silence fell over the table. Elena moved protectively toward me. "Do you want me to ask him to leave?" she whispered. I looked at my guests, people who knew my story, who knew who Marcus was and what he had done. Some looked worried, others curious. "No," I replied finally. "I'm going to talk to him." I walked toward the car with firm steps. Marcus got out hesitantly, wearing a simple shirt and jeans. He seemed nervous, holding a small wrapped package in his hands. "Sorry to show up without warning," he said when I approached. "I called several times, but no one answered." "We're having lunch," I explained, gesturing toward the table on the balcony. "It's the 2-year anniversary of my move here." He looked at the guests who made no effort to hide that they were watching our interaction. "I didn't know you had visitors. Can I come back another day?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes, that he should come back another day, or better yet, not come back at all. But another part, a part that surprised me, wanted to close this chapter once and for all. "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked directly. He extended the small package. "I brought you this. It's your 62nd birthday next week. I didn't want to let it pass unnoticed." I was surprised that he remembered the date. In recent years, living in his house, my birthday rarely received more than a hurried, "Happy birthday" mumble. "Can I?" he asked, indicating the package. I nodded, taking it carefully. It was light, wrapped in simple paper with a discreet ribbon. "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence settled between us. Marcus looked at his feet, then at the house, the property, anywhere except my eyes. "Your house is beautiful," he commented finally. "Exactly as you described it in the book." "It's my home now," I replied. He nodded. "You seem well, happy." "I am," I confirmed. More silence. Behind me I could feel the attentive stares of my guests, especially Elena, always protective. "Marcus, I have guests," I said gently but firmly. "Why don't you tell me what really brought you here?" He breathed deeply, finally meeting my gaze. "I'm moving out west to San Diego. I got a job there. I'm leaving next week." The news caught me off guard. "Oh, that's good for you, I suppose." "I think so, Shastawa," he replied. "It's a new beginning, away from the memories, from the people who knew the man I was." He paused, swallowing hard. "I needed to see you before I left, to tell you in person that I'm still sorry, that your book changed my life as much as yours, that I understand now what I did, even if it took too long." His words were sincere. I could tell. There was no manipulation or self-pity in them, just the raw simplicity of truth. "I hope you find what you're looking for out there," I replied honestly. Marcus looked at the balcony where my friends were trying to hide their close observation. "You've built a beautiful life here, new people, new purpose." He smiled sadly. "I'm happy for you, really." In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely. It was more like releasing a burden I didn't know I was still carrying. Marcus no longer had power over my happiness or my peace. He was just a person from my past who was moving on with his own journey, just as I had moved on with mine. "Thank you for coming to say goodbye," I said, "and good luck in San Diego." He nodded, seeming to understand that this was the closure we both needed. No emotional hugs, no promises of reconciliation, just a mutual and respectful acknowledgement of our separate paths. "Goodbye, Olivia," he said, using my name instead of Mom, a small gesture that showed understanding of the new boundaries. "Goodbye, Marcus." He got in the car and drove away slowly down the dirt road, raising a small cloud of dust behind him. I stood watching until the vehicle disappeared around the curve, the small gift still in my hands. When I returned to the balcony, everyone was looking at me with expressions ranging from concern to curiosity. Elena was the first to speak. "Are you okay?" Surprisingly, I was. Better than I imagined possible. "Yes," I replied, taking my place back at the table. "He came to say goodbye. He's moving out west." "And is that the end?" asked one of the shelter women gently, her wise eyes reading beyond my words. I thought for a moment before responding, "I think it's an appropriate ending. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just sufficient." There were understanding nods around the table. Many of those people had lived through their own closures, some complete, others partial, all necessary to move forward. "What did he bring you?" Elena asked, indicating the package I'd placed on the table. "I don't know," I replied, beginning to carefully unwrap it. Inside was a wooden box, simple but beautiful. When I opened it, I found a delicate gold wristwatch that I immediately recognized. It had belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, and finally to me. I thought it had been lost during the rushed move from Marcus's house. "I found it among the things left behind," read the small note beside the watch. "I know how much it means to you. I'm sorry for everything." I touched the watch gently, feeling its familiar cold texture against my fingers. It was more than an object. It was a piece of my history, a connection to the strong women who came before me, women whose lives I never fully knew, whose struggles probably resembled mine in ways I would never know. "It belonged to my grandmother," I explained to the guests. "I thought I'd lost it forever." "How wonderful that it came back to you," Mrs. Mitchell commented gently. I put the watch on my wrist where it belonged. In a way, it was symbolic. Time that had been interrupted now flowed again, marking not just hours and minutes, but also the continuity of life with all its imperfect breaks and repairs. The rest of the afternoon passed in a lighter atmosphere. The unexpected visit from Marcus, instead of spoiling the celebration, had added a note of closure I didn't know I needed. Conversations flowed again, laughter returned, and when the sun began to set, coloring the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt complete in a way I couldn't explain. After the last guest left, I sat alone on the balcony with Biscuit sleeping at my feet. My grandmother's watch glowed softly in the lamplight, marking time with its constant and comforting tic-tac. Thinking back on the 2 years that had passed, I realized how far I had come from that terrible night in Marcus's house. The woman who trembled under her son's blows, who shrank from her daughter-in-law's malicious laughter, who accepted humiliation in silence, had transformed into someone I barely recognized. Not because this new version of me was a stranger, but because it was who I always should have been. At 62 years old, I had rebuilt not just a life, but an identity based not on sacrifices or family, obligations, but on conscious choices and healthy boundaries. I had discovered that it's never too late to say no to disrespect, no to violence, no to relationships that diminish instead of elevate. And perhaps most importantly, I had discovered that it's never too late to say yes to yourself. The sun disappeared completely on the horizon, leaving only a last golden glow. I stood, called Biscuit, and entered the house that had become truly mine. Tomorrow would be another day in my new life, a life I had conquered not just by surviving the blows, but by finding the courage to respond to them, not with more violence, but with a cold and precise determination that changed everything. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the word restart, the title of my book, the theme of the support group, the essence of my journey. Starting over didn't mean erasing the past or pretending the wounds never existed. It meant building something new and better on the scars, using them as a foundation instead of allowing them to be prisons. Marcus was starting over in San Diego. Other women were starting over at the shelter, in small city apartments, in new relationships they were building. And I had started over here, among apple and cherry trees, with a caramel-colored dog and a murmuring stream, surrounded by people who saw me for what I was, not for what they could extract from me. Time had taught me that revenge doesn't need to be loud or violent to be effective. Sometimes the best answer to cruelty is simply refusing to be diminished by it, building a life so full and joyful that those who tried to break us become irrelevant, not from hatred, but from growth. This was my truth at 62, that life can bloom more beautifully after a devastating storm, that the strongest roots often grow in soil that was completely overturned, that it is never, ever too late to say, "This life is mine." I'm sitting on my balcony in the mountains of North Carolina watching the sunset as I finish this account. 5 years have passed since that devastating night. 5 years since I sold the house. 5 years since I found my way back to myself. My relationship with Marcus is not what it was, nor will it ever be. But it exists, redefined, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. We talk occasionally on the phone, brief but honest conversations. He sends cards on my birthday and Christmas. I respond when I feel inclined to, without obligation. Last year, he asked permission to visit me. After much consideration, I accepted. He spent a weekend here, staying at a hotel in town, respecting my space. He met Biscuit, admired my garden, walked with me along the path by the stream. It was uncomfortable at times, but also healing in ways I didn't expect. We didn't recover what we lost, but found something new, something based on honesty rather than obligation, on respect rather than dependence. My book continues to help women. I received a letter last week from a 75-year-old reader who finally left her abusive son after reading my story. "If you could at 60, she wrote, I can at 75. The Starting Together group now has chapters in 3 cities. Dorothy and I developed a training program for other facilitators. Women who survived are helping other women survive. The cycle continues, but this time toward healing instead of harm. Elena visits every month. The Mitchells became like family. I've made new friendships in town, united by a book club I organize at my house every 2 weeks. My garden produces more than I can consume, so I sell the excess at the farmers market in town on Saturdays. The money goes directly to the shelter. Biscuit now has a companion, a stray female dog I adopted last year. I called her Honey because she's sweet as the Mitchells' honey. Do I regret selling the house? Never. It was the necessary catalyst for change that had to happen. It was my way of saying enough after years of saying yes to everything. Do I regret the pain I caused? Sometimes. In the silent moments of the night, when I think about Marcus's face reading my note, I feel a pang. But then I remember that short-term pain prevented decades of accumulated resentment. That pain saved us from becoming strangers who share blood, but no genuine connection. The most important lesson I learned wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about dignity, about the fact that self-love is not selfishness, it's survival, about how we teach others to treat us by what we're willing to tolerate. If I could go back and talk to the Olivia standing in that kitchen with a broken heart and a swollen face, I would tell her this: your pain is valid. Your reaction will be extreme to some, but necessary for you. You're not being vengeful. You're being brave. And on the other side of this devastation awaits a version of yourself you didn't know existed, stronger, more complete, freer. To all the mothers, grandmothers, women who feel invisible in their own families, your worth is not determined by what you can give to others. You are valuable simply by existing, and it's okay, more than okay, to demand the respect you deserve. Some will call my story one of revenge. I call it one of liberation. Some will say I went too far. I say I finally went far enough to find myself. And some will ask if it was worth it. My answer is simple. Look at me now, living fully at 67, with relationships based on mutual respect, with my own passions, with dreams to pursue. Yes, every difficult moment was worth it, because for the first time in decades, when I look in the mirror, I don't see just someone's mother or someone's victim. I see Olivia, and she is enough.